and we will resume on the noise chapter. Summary, over to you, and we are at paragraph 17.
This is Kiwi Rails. Miss Hepplewhite, Miss Rosalind Hancock and Dr. Giles support the inclusion of rail noise controls in a bike. Yeah, I agree that noise and vibration from railway corridors should cause adverse health and people living near these networks. However, I do not consider these rules are appropriate given the low number of train movements and the noise and vibration levels. Would you like me to keep going with my statement, or would you like to hear?
I think if we hand over, yes.
Okay. Start from the top of mine. So Kiwi Rail Holdings, which is a submission by Ms. Hepplewhite, Ms. Remington Hancock and Dr. Charles. I saw the following inclusions in the PDP. So the inclusion of a rail corridor noise control overlay to apply within 100 metres of the rail corridor. And within this overlay, dwelling would require acoustic insulation and ventilation being installed, or may require, I should say. The inclusion of a vibration alert overlay area to apply within 60 metres of the rail corridor. So in my response, in respect of the rail corridor noise overlay extending to 100 corridor, I offer the following comments. I do not object to the inclusion of an acoustic insulation rule and of the view that the protection of noise sensitive activities are important. Originally, I had proposed an acoustic insulation rule for dwellings within 40 metres of the railway line. This was based on one freight train movement within a 1 hour period. Freight trains are typically. And this recommendation was based on noise measurements of freight trains that I had carried out on the North Island main trunk line. But this rule that I proposed was not adopted in the PDP. So the 100 metres proposed by Kiwi Rail is the standard effects envelope recommended by Kiwi Rail throughout New Zealand. This setback distance is recommended regardless of the number of rail movements on a line. And I know that the Wairarapa line currently has much slower movements compared with other rail lines in New Zealand. So, for example, the North Island main trunk. So my 40 metre recommendation was to reflect reduced use of. In respect of the vibration alert overlay, I know that there are no rules or provisions associated with this overlay. Therefore, I consider this to be a planning matter rather than a vibration matter. My recommendations. In respect to acoustic insulation, I have no objection to a rule being included to protect noise sensitive activities, but within a specific. Due to the low movements on this line, I am of the view that 100 metre envelope of the fence needs to be, given that 100 metres is also applied to rail lines that have much higher movements. And then in the vibration alert overlay area, I refer to.
Thank you. Questions? We'll go back to Katie.
Maybe at the end.
Yeah.
So on the rail corridor noise overlay, Ms. Remington Hancock provided information on the number of trains on the Wairarapa line as outlined below. So there are currently 3 bulk freight trains per day. Ms. Remington Hancock has noted that if the North Island main trunk line was closed, the line could carry 17 additional trains, i.e. due to a derailment where the rail network is broken due to a natural event or for a bridge replacement. However, no information has been provided on how often this, or even if this has occurred. The current passenger services, all run by diesel locomotives, include 10 daily passenger trains between Monday and Thursday, 10 daily passenger trains on a Friday, and 4 passenger trains between Saturday and Sunday. In terms of any increase in train movements, Ms. Remington Hancock has referred to the Greater Wellington draft, there's an extra word in there, Regional Public Transport Plan, 2025 to 2035, which is being consulted on at the moment, which outlines the future plans for the Wairarapa line. Those plans to increase the peak service on the Wairarapa line between Wellington and Masters.
Sorry, can I just, interrupt you just for a moment? I think going back to your paragraph 20, where you say 10 daily passenger trains, between Monday and Thursday, that I
So
think.
that's 10 a day.
Yeah, so I think that probably needs to be amended and saying it's for all A, B and C,
Yeah,
that it reads per day. Because otherwise it kind of could read, if somebody was reading this later, it's 10 over the 4 days. Yeah, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
So the plans include to increase the peak service on the Wairarapa line between Wellington and Marston to 6 peak services in late 2029 and 2030. There are currently 3 peak services. So this what I'm reading is from
Yes, yeah, and it's just the one that, yeah.
to increase the interpeak and weekend service frequency on the Wairarapa line between Wellington and Marston, to expand currently along the Manawatu and Wairarapa lines with hyper trains as part of investigating innovative solutions to reduce carbon emissions, and the Wellington Metro Rimataku Tunnel ventilation project to install an active ventilation system in the Rimataku Tunnel to accommodate passenger services on the Wairarapa line. So I consider that the evidence provided by Ms. Grinland and Hancock has not provided the actual numbers of future train movements, and no information has been provided on any increase in freight trains. Therefore, in my opinion, based on the evidence available, there is not a significant increase in trains which warrant these. At this time, I therefore do not consider that the costs of the plan provisions sought outweigh the benefits. The costs of the plan provisions are the imposition of costs on property owners and developers, raising the installation requirements, and mechanical ventilation is required. Given the current low number of train movements, the noise levels are significant. Therefore, these costs would have limited benefits in terms of mitigating the effects of receivers. However, it is recognised that train movements may increase over time, and that the imposing these costs now would future-proof the railway corridor, and these benefits would be realised in the future. While this may be the case, I consider it would be effective and efficient for that to be made as part of a future district plan review process, rather than imposing these costs now. Based on the information currently available and the cost of implementing the provisions, I do not recommend any amendments. Would you like me to move on to the vibration?
Yes.
In terms of the rail vibration area overlay, I do not consider that this is appropriate given the low number of train movements. The vibration level is significant. I note that there are no rules or other provisions associated with the overlay. I will question the need to provide this overlay as it is for information purposes only. I do not recommend any amendment. And cover the noise sensitive activity tradition now.
I think we just do all of it.
Okay.
And yeah, thank you.
Ms. Hepperwaith considers that hospitals should be included in the definition of noise sensitive activity, as healthcare activity excludes healthcare institutions in which there is on-site residential healthcare staff and overnight accommodation of patients. I agree that hospitals which necessarily accommodate patients overnight should therefore be included in the definition, and I recommend the following amendment to the definition.
Thank you. Questions from the panel? All right, first.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off.
Yeah.
And these questions are probably to both Mr. Arden and yourself, Teresa. Just a few facts to start with. As we established, the operative plan didn't contain any bespoke rules on setbacks from railway corridors in terms of noise insulation, and the proposed plan doesn't either, and so this has come to the panel by way of a submission from Kiwi Rail seeking both a noise overlay and a vibration alert area. Okay, and there are policies proposed policies, rules and standards for the noise overlay, but none for the vibration overlay.
Yes, there's no rules.
Okay. Good. And what's your understanding of how the process leading up to the proposed plan resulted in no provisions for the noise overlay or the vibration alert area? Presumably there was a consultation and engagement with Kiwi Rail during the planned drafting exercise.
Yes, I wasn't involved in it then, so maybe Charles would be best to speak to that.
The committee the panel has some understanding of this at a high level, Mr. Horrell, because they were involved as the advisory committee. But can you take us through the sort of the timeframes involved?
Yeah. So prior to December 2022, there was the initial feedback sought from Kiwi Rail as a key stakeholder on the district plan review. Council officers contacted Kiwi Rail. No specific feedback was provided at that point. The councils then prepared the draft plan and sought feedback in December 2022. Kiwi Rail provided feedback to that where they requested this 100 metre performance standard and associated rule. They didn't provide an evidence base. It was largely a high level effects-based assessment and observed the state highway rule that had been put forward. Following that, the Joint Committee directed further evidence be provided by Kiwi Rail to substantiate that. They provided a letter to the councils in June 2023 to indicate that further Section 32 analysis would be provided. That was not made available before the district plan was notified, but has been provided with the submission. I understand it was prepared by Taylor Consultants, which Ms. Hooser has responded to under Section 42A. The main evidence they did rely on, though, was a decision for the Whangarei District Council, who proposed a similar rule in that district plan. I guess they put that forward as a form of precedent, which I understand was not accepted, given it's a different context. And the Wairapa.
Okay, just two questions. Just on dates, just remind us the date of the notification of the PDP.
The notification of the proposed district plan was October 2023.
And the first date that you talked about was the engagement with stakeholders.
So that was undertaken between May and December 2022. So it was identifying issues associated with the operative plan.
Yes.
That feedback sought was open-ended on matters that they would like to see changed in the district plan.
Yes. And the December 2022 date, what was that? It was
the consultation period for the draft district plan. So that was public feedback sought.
From how long was that period?
That period was, might need to clarify that, but council officers recall, I'll need to clarify that.
So that was the draft. That was when the draft plan was.
That was a non-statutory process, so a local government process for consultation.
Yes, and is that okay? So the Kiwi Rail's response was requesting the 100 metres, but no evidence base, and the panel went back to Kiwi Rail and asked for some evidence, and that resulted in the letter of June 2023.
That's right.
Okay, if you can just get us the dates for the consultation period on the draft, that would be useful.
And I can just to clarify that Kiwi Rail were contacted as a stakeholder prior to or sometime between May 2022 and December 2022, and they didn't reply or respond. Is that correct?
Not that I can see. I didn't personally contact, but I was part of the team and that hadn't been reported. So if there was any comment, it would have been
Recorded.
yes, it would have been very high level and
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's the background. In terms of the rule framework that has been proposed by Kiwi Rail and their witnesses, particularly Ms. Hepplethwaite, can I just take you to Ms. Hepplethwaite's evidence and go to the appendix A on page 14 of her evidence. This is a question for both Mr. Arden and it's page 4. It begins on page 14. So very well set out. I think I understand what's being proposed. There's obviously 2 overlays, and they would be spatially defined, presumably. Does the submission actually define those spatially, or do they rely solely on a narrative such as the 60 metres and the 100 metres?
Oh, it's just defined as those.
Yeah, it wasn't. The submission didn't include a map with those.
I'm not aware. I'd have to go back.
Yeah. It's a shame it didn't, but if you could check that, that would be good. And okay, and it's one of the questions I was uncertain. One of the matters I was uncertain of was where the 60 metre or 100 metre would be measured from, but it would be from the edge of the designation. Is that your understanding?
That's how I read the.
Yes, not the centre line. So, can you? And I've assumed that the rail corridor is designated through the entirety of the district.
I would have to check, but I imagine it is.
Yes, if you could check that.
Hope
And
so.
yeah,
You'd really want to hope so.
yeah. And this will come up at there's a future hearing on designations, but the panel would be interested in understanding how wide the designation corridor designation is. Yes,
There is a lot.
sometimes it's defined as a distance from the tracks. Sometimes it's actually shown on district planning maps. So it would be good to actually have an answer to that verbally before this afternoon session.
We can.
Maybe someone in the back row could. Thank you. And as Councillor Plummer said, it may well vary between districts. But
And zones as well, and the zones.
yeah, we just want to get a feel for the approach, because that will affect the spatial extent of the overlays. And then again, we go to a definition, which is noise sensitive activity, and there's been some proposed changes to that requested by Kiwi Rail, and I just can't remember whether you'd added. I think you'd
Including hospitals.
hospitals.
When they're added, yeah.
Yes. Just. Yeah. Okay. Have you got any, Katie, do you have any comments on the putting aside the hospital component, any of the red changes, particularly that in clause A that have been requested by Hepplethwaite?
Then the other
In the definition?
the other changes that I haven't included.
Yes.
They were changes from the section 42A.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
For example, the request to delete the words in any habitable room hasn't been recommended by you. Can you just explain why that is?
I guess the the habitable rooms are those rooms where are specific to where right. So like your living room or your bedrooms where you know you're sleeping or you're that should be kind of they need to be included within that as part of those other activities.
Kind of areas of rest
Yeah,
and
yeah. I don't see that should be deleted.
Yes, I understand that. If it was deleted, would the noise sensitive activity and the rules that relate to that cover all aspects of the residential activity?
They all-
That would be the,
yeah.
Yeah.
Those.
so deleting the word would actually, deleting the phrases would actually widen the,
Yes.
okay, understand. And that's not the intention.
No.
Okay. 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 I want to go to Mr. Arden now. The rule is, or the rule 16 is pretty straightforward, but it's the devil's in the S4 standard itself, which even as a, well, I like to think I'm a reasonably experienced planner, even as a planner, it runs to, gosh, well, quite a few pages.
Yeah.
Have you managed to get your head around that rule and how it would operate if it was implemented?
Oh, sorry, in their evidence.
Yes, S4 pages 16. So 15, 16, 17, 18 and 19 and 20, particularly S4, which starts on 16.
Yeah, so that's kind of the pretty standard key rail submission.
Yes,
So that's what you would see in other districts.
yes.
Uh,
Are there any aspects of that rule from an acoustician point of view that you'd like to comment on, or is there anything uncertain in that rule from your perspective? Or standard, sorry.
yeah, I mean, you probably say the devil within the detail. So without, I mean, I say it's fairly standard. So without combing over every word, now it should be fairly straightforward.
Yes. So when it says any building, this is in clause 1.
Mhm.
Any under S4, any new building or alteration that contains a noise sensitive activity, which we know based on Katie's evidence would be any habitable room.
Mhm.
So it'd be a new dwelling with habitable rooms or an extension to an existing dwelling that has habitable rooms, would need to comply with A, B and C and the table S4. And that's essentially setting in presumably an indoor, a standard that represents noise levels inside the habitable room.
Yeah, so it's A or B.
Yes, okay.
It's not all of them.
these sounds.
So the evidence that Kiwi Rail put forward, and it was in Dr. Child's evidence, but was also and been repeated in the work done by Taylor Planning, etc., suggests that at 100 metres, the likely or predicted noise levels are around 54 dB. Is that your understanding? The table that's been presented.
Is that table in
S,
Oh.
table S4, is that the one?
No,
you've got
no,
there?
this is a table in the evidence.
Yeah, that's here on bottom of page 16 going into 17.
No, sorry. Table S4 is the standards that would be in the plan. I'm talking about the predicted levels of exposure from noise associated with rail. It's not in the rules. It's
No,
in
oh, and her
okay,
evidence.
so
your evidence.
Yeah, this is her evidence just here. That's what I'm referring to. Is that it? Page 17 of her evidence?
No,
No.
no, that's the rule. So let me find it for you because it's important.
Is this in Dr. Charles's
Yes, so Dr. Child's evidence.
page? Is that the table you're?
Yes, that's the one. Evan? All right,
No, page 17.
17.
The page number.
Dr. Charles's evidence for the rest of the panel, so they're aware. Is that correct?
yes, page 7. Yes, so it's the table there, distance from the track and the sound level. So at 100 metres, I think I said 54, it's 56 dB.
Yep.
Yep. So do you have any reason to doubt the metrics that are in that table?
No, so they were measured by the company I worked for some 15 years ago.
Yes. That's-
I think probably to note, if you 5.5 below is that the sound level assumption is 2 freight train movements in a 1 hour period.
Okay.
Yeah. With my proposed rule, I just assumed 1 freight train movement within an hour. So that will obviously affect the noise levels.
Yes, would reduce them obviously
Yeah.
in this table.
Yeah. So it would be 3 dB difference.
A 3 dB?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Okay, and these are predictions, aren't they? Were they based on measurement?
I think they were based on measurements
Yes.
done in 2009. And
Your Marshall Day and Associates did the base work for that?
Yeah.
Okay. So with a rule that requires 35 or 40 dB in a habitable room, depending on what the activity is, and even with a 3 dB reduction in this table, it's highly unlikely, isn't it, that any new habitable room would comply with the rule and be a permitted activity?
without sound insulation.
Without, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Also, in her evidence on B, a noise barrier entirely blocks line of sight from all parts of doors and windows to all points 3.8 metres above the railway tracks. Which is quite for an alteration or a new building as well.
Yeah. Well, if you wouldn't mind, can you just?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry. Just. Okay. Going to move on to ventilation and insulation, but was there something on that rule that you wanted to?
No, I'm going to ask about justification for their submission on.
Yeah, can come in later on that. Yeah. So that's the first part of the rule, Mr. Arden, the standard and the likely exposure that's going to trigger that standard. And you've indicated that it's even with just 1 train per hour, and it's done on a rolling average over an hour. The rule would be triggered and we'd be looking at a restricted discretionary activity. So then the rule goes on to talk about mechanical ventilation to ensure that the habitable rooms located within overlay meet certain standards. Can you just explain to the panel what that would involve an acoustic perspective in terms of putting in mechanical ventilation?
In terms of how much air accessory you need, that's probably beyond my area of expertise, so I can't comment on that. Generally, if you want to get good sound insulation, you need to have a sealed building, so you can't open windows.
Okay.
The purpose of the supplementary system is just to provide that fresh air
Yes.
and meet G4, I think, of the building code.
That would be like a air conditioning, heating system as well,
Yeah.
because you'd need the temperature control too, wouldn't you, if you couldn't open windows?
You would.
Is that what I'm?
So that's probably beyond my knowledge in terms of.
By keeping it at a high level, the aim of this provision is that if a new noise sensitive activity is being proposed, and if they're opening It really, it must be on the basis that they're not going to open their windows and that they have a mechanical ventilation system to deal with that too. And if they don't have a mechanical ventilation, what does that mean for the standards?
So you can have openable windows. You obviously don't have to have sealed facade, but to meet the performance, you need your windows shut. So it's basically that mechanical ventilation system is there, so you don't have to choose between opening your windows and not having fresh air.
Right. So would the council, if the council is receiving a proposal at building consent stage for a new dwelling, and it's identified that it's within the 100 metres overlay, what does the building owner need to demonstrate to the council? Do they need to show that there is a mechanical ventilation system being proposed?
Yeah.
Okay.
To the satisfaction of the building code.
I think because there's heating and cooling requirements as well.
Yes.
And with,
I'm not up to date with the building code, so it might have changed since then, but it always used to be just fresh air.
and that would also relate, would it, to like an additional habitable room being put onto an existing property as opposed to just a new property?
Okay. And then there's a design report required to go in, presumably with the building consent, if it's going to comply as a permitted activity. This is on page 18 of Ms. Hepworth's evidence, clause 3. Could you have a read of that and just explain what that means in lay language to the panel? And you jump in, Katie, if you need to. I understand the first part. The report has to demonstrate that it's comply with the standards in clause 1 and with the mechanical ventilation on 2. That's as relevant. That's one. And so that compliance with 1A and C, which is compliance with the table when there's 4, and that it's there's a construction schedule too, I see. That must be something further. Yeah. Oh yes, construction schedule is AP11. So an acoustician needs to confirm that that it's good to go in those terms. Is that something that you've been involved in your career?
Yeah. So we frequently do that. I mean, I'd probably just say, you know, if they're using the construction schedule, you probably don't need an acoustician to confirm that.
Yes.
But yeah, it's fairly common that we.
Very tick box, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Someone. I mean, I think anyone can.
So I understand all that. What I don't understand is the rest of it. When doing that, railway noise must be assumed to be, and the reduction rate and that. Could you just explain to the panel what that means?
The reduction rate.
Well, the words beginning, and when doing so, railway noise must be
Assumed. Yeah. So the assumption of 70 dB at 12 meters is based on that table we talked about before. And normally with noise, obviously the further you get away, it drops off. So the 3 dB per doubling of distance up to 40 meters is just to reflect that's how noise from train propagates.
So that's really putting in narrative form what that table would have delivered in Mr. Stoll's evidence.
Yes, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's consistent.
And then the construction schedule, as you said, is really just a tick box exercise.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And how does that rule framework compare to the one for NZTA or noise sensitive activities within 100 metres of the state highway?
So NZTA use modelling of existing roads. So the road overlay is relevant to the noise levels generated by vehicles on that road.
That's standard 3, isn't it, Katie?
Sorry, on standard or rule?
Standard 3. Standards do the heavy lifting, don't they? That's not the rules themselves. And there will be a rule, that's listed. Yep, and it's rule, 8, is it?
what you're saying.
For state highway.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. 8, yeah, 13. 13, okay. It just seems that rule, Mr. Aiden, that standard 3 is a lot simpler for the state highway than the Kiwi Rail one. Is there any, can any comment on that?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of we work backwards, in terms of the kind of approved building solutions, that is kind of fairly common in other districts. So you can either.
What's fairly common, the NZTA one or the rail one?
For either, even just for external sound insulation, quite often they'll have just construction schedules that you can use to avoid going down the acoustic report route. But yeah, I think you're right. It's just one number, isn't it? Inside the building. It still does
35.
Yeah, 40 for road noise.
Yeah.
24 hours. So I think probably the critical difference is that the assumed rail noise levels, which is probably where a lot of the complication comes into, because that's just based on standard effects envelope.
Yes.
But in S3 for the state highway noise, you'd still need an acoustic report to demonstrate the 40 dB inside.
Eddie, where's in rule in standard 3, where does it say? Where's the reference to the certification report?
Just
It's
Yeah,
when this consent's required, because this will be a permitted activity, provided you are certified, presume. Is it in the rule or is it in the standard? Is your permitted activity you comply with standard 3 in the rule. Where does it say that?
yeah, I can't see where it's in the standard other than the matters of discretion.
Okay. Maybe it's just an assumption that that's, I mean,
How they would.
Yeah. Okay. There might need to be some, might be useful to add an advice note to that effect, which we done under clause 16, I imagine. Okay, thank you for that. I was just trying to get it between the noise and noise from rail and noise from state highway effects. I'll leave it there, and I've got one last question. I'll come in towards the end. You had some questions, Alistair?
You know, I was really interested in the underlying justification of Kiwi Rail here, and in their they talk about expand the current services along the Manawatu Wairarapa lines. They talk about carrying additional 17 trains. Information that's certainly been provided to all the councils about the expansion of services.
That's a question for.
But I just want to see whether they provided anything at all to justify this expansion north, where to councils they've said the exact opposite.
I haven't received any evidence that suggests that there is it.
I couldn't find any comment at all about the.
And the evidence I have seen in the evidence that they provided in the evidence as part of this hearing hasn't provided anything.
And leads obviously onto the obvious question, say if they're using that argument as the basis of their argument that they need all these rules and extra restrictions and meters. In your view, is there any justification for that?
Not currently would be.
Okay, so then that brings me then to Mr. Arden's, your comments about the reduction in distance based on that you're recommending would be acceptable given the current use of the line down instead of the 100-metre setback to the 60 metre, I think it's 40 or 60. So what would it take for you to go from that comment to Kiwi Rail's argument of 100 metres? What's missing?
A few more freight trains, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty low movement line. I don't think there's necessarily a defined number, but we do have challenges when we do have low movements on rail lines and applying the same standards as we would on, say, the North Island main trunk line. I think I can dig it out quickly.
Okay, so just taking that a little bit further, then the introduction of new passenger trains in 2029, 2030, if you hold your breath, would you accept that is a significant increase that would justify this, or is that to justify what they're asking for?
For passenger trains?
Yeah.
Possibly not, because passenger trains are not as loud. So freight trains are so much louder, so that whenever you do any noise assessment, it's kind of driven by the number of freight trains you have going past. It might be slightly different up here because it's diesel and I don't have a huge amount of measurements up here, but I still imagine that even a diesel passenger train would be much quieter than a freight train that's 30 carriages long.
So their argument here about increasing peak service wouldn't change your view in terms of where they talk about increased peak services to 6 peak services 2029-30, where there's currently 3. So doubling the peak services wouldn't actually be enough for you to change your view on the noise bound.
I mean, I can come back to you with a specific answer on that if you prefer, but I mean,
I don't think so. If you're happy to.
I think we would be interested in that, Mr. Arden.
And
Okay.
also just for information for you as well, Mr. Arden, that the proposed new trains and increased service are meant to be hybrid model trains, so they won't be the current diesels that we have either.
Okay, just last bit, and it's about freight. So when they say potentially 17 extra trains, they provided no evidence as to that's actually
They
doable.
They said that could be used, but they haven't said. I don't know if
Rockets, but
I don't know if that's ever occurred.
There's no,
okay, so no evidence presented that that's feasible.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Craig.
Just wondering if there's any comment around the fact that these freight trains aren't in the Marsden district. They leave from the Cardinal district to Wellington. Are those overlays going to pertain through the Marsden area?
there's no freight trains north of.
They
North of Marsden.
No,
from
from
the Cardinal district. So it would be extremely rare to see a freight train go over the Wainawa River into Marsden.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
So it's just how are we going to use overlays to go through those districts?
It's a good question to Kiwi Rail.
Yeah, hold that one for this afternoon.
But yeah, just one on that, most of the freight, the logging trains originate from Wainawa, which is in the Cardinal district. But to trigger what Kiwi Rail want here, how many extra freight, it's probably a question this afternoon, how many extra freight train movements do you envisage a day to make? Is it more than one 30 minutes or half hour or?
I looked at that.
So
I didn't change that. Sorry.
as I say, I think the Kiwi Rail kind of reverse effect envelope is based on 2 freight trains. Period. hope that, I wouldn't expect there would be 48 freight trains.
Mm.
And I think also in the guidance they provided, it's something, I'm just trying to find it now. They talk about being more than 20 movements a day, on average, but I can't be sure if that's in specific relation to freight trains or not.
Get some clarification and stuff.
I've got a couple.
Yeah.
Mr. Arden, I've got a couple. From an acoustic perspective, in terms of sound propagation, is there a difference between the freight trains and the passenger trains in terms of noise propagation?
Not as such, except the freight trains will be longer, so it will be around a lot longer.
And one of the, okay. I've just got a couple of questions for you, Katie. I think it's about the risk of acting and not acting under section 32. You've come to the position that you think the risk of not acting is acceptable because there's not any evidential basis to justify the role. And Ms. Hepworth-Waite's responded to that in a sense. That was your position, obviously, in your summary statement, but it was also the position in the 42A, and the additional information that was provided by Ms. Grinlington Hancock hasn't changed your view, has it?
No.
Okay. Ms. Hepworth-Waite, in terms of your 42A, has addressed that issue on pages 9 and 10 of your evidence. And at paragraph 710 through to 712, but particularly 710, paragraph B and C. And she's taken issue with your table in your 42A at paragraph 201, where you've helpfully tried to indicate what's the sort of magnitude of the number of houses that could be, or properties that could be affected in all of the zones, because the rule would apply to all zones, wouldn't it? Yes. And you provided some breakdown of that between the residential zone, the future urban zone, general rural zone, at 1,249 properties, fully or partially within the 100 metres. And what she's said is that she's assessed the general residential zone using council's GIS and aerial photographs, and estimates that about between 70 and 85% of those sites already contain a dwelling. So she's suggesting that for the residential zone, at least, there's between 15 and 30% that are vacant, and that's a risk that's not a. I'm not trying to put words in her mouth. She's suggesting that the problem, the potential risk of acting is not as great as you think it might be, and that conversely, that the risk of not acting is not acceptable. Do you have any comments on her paragraph 710B?
I guess the rule that she has proposed would also apply to any altered building. So
Yes.
there is always that area that already has existing. So if you were to alter to include a new bedroom or new kitchen, you would still have to apply those provisions.
And that would apply to infill, which we've now enabled.
Yeah.
In the district plan.
So I still think that is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she goes on, that was residential. She goes on to talk about rural properties in paragraph C. Did he any comment on that?
I mean, I would tend to agree that those properties are larger and they can probably find a location outside of that overlay.
Yes. And then finally, she questions the relevance of the last column dealing with square metre. Do you have any comment on that? It's paragraph D.
A specific comment. I just thought it was a way to address how fast this overlay could result across the district.
Okay. Final question, I promise.
Could I just,
No,
oh, no,
no,
on what you've just wanted, I just
Yes.
want to quick. So the number of houses in the info question, that makes no difference to the noise that the trains generate. And coming back to the question that I asked you before, about the frequency and the noise of trains, the number of houses in there actually doesn't enter into the conversation about the required setback based on the 60 or 100 metres. That'd be a fair comment.
So you're saying that however plated the area is, it doesn't change the setback?
Having more houses in the area.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a red herring to the noise that's generated because it's still within that urban environment that the train goes through. So my question about having more houses in that, okay, may well be more houses affected, but should that actually change the rule as to whether we're in the 60 metres or the 100 metre or 40 metres or 100 metres based on the noise that the trains make? It just seems to be a little bit of a red herring for how many houses are in the area.
I think it's more the fact that the number of houses that are in the area, the cost implications for any alterations and additions, that's where your thought was going as opposed to.
If I want to come back to view on the noise and the frequency of the trains, so that the number of houses, it doesn't alter that.
It's independent, isn't it?
They're completely independent.
Yeah.
So they would still need to provide the evidence that they are doing a lot more train movements and so on for it to be viable.
Yeah. David, and
Yes.
then we.
Yeah, I haven't got any more. Let's ask another question.
No, there are two parts to my final question.
That's true.
The first is under the topic of cost benefit, and there's been I think it's the Taylor report, Taylor planning, page 15. This is a sort of like a section 32 assessment, global assessment for it's underpins this sort of template. It's largely the cost benefits largely looking at the cost to Kiwi Rail over the life of the railway and the length of the railway. At the very end of that page, it talks about a cost burden on establishing activities sensitive to noise in the railway, and it says that these are largely one-off upfront costs, which is a small proportion of the page of the total build cost. Additionally, these costs are significantly lower than the cost associated with no mitigation, and that's a cost to the rail network. The cost that's been estimated in the paragraph above that is $3,000 for an acoustic assessment, plus 3% of the building value for the associated mitigation to achieve compliance, and that would be largely the mechanical ventilation. Have you had an opportunity to test those figures at all? Okay. Would be useful, Charles, to have something from the council's building consents team on the efficacy of those costs, both in terms of the certification, but also the costs to actually put in the mitigation, the mechanical ventilation, etc. As a general rule, though, Katie, those costs would be a greater proportion for an add-on to an existing facility than they would if they were spread across a new build. You'd accept that? Okay. Finally, if the panel did nothing, this is a question to you and Mr. Arden, to what extent could we take some comfort that the NZTA overlay would act as a default or default protection for rail noise, given that there's for parts of the district at least, there's some sort of same locality for both the highway and the railway. Generally railways tend to follow highways. Would that, even though it might not be intended to provide protection, would those rules have a consequential benefit for Kiwi Rail if their rule wasn't adopted?
I know you do. I would have to look at,
You understand what I was
I
asking?
understand what you're saying, yeah.
A simple mapping exercise to
Yeah.
show the location of the
It would,
rail corridor
Yeah.
and the state highway would be
Yeah.
useful in the writer reply. Just a simple graphic.
Yeah, it'd have to be within 200 meters, I guess.
Yeah.
200 meters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
They're not.
that's the answer I was looking for.
I imagine because the end of the TA will go up to 100 meters,
Yes.
and then the PRL will go. They're proposing 100 meters.
So it might partially cover it, but not fully.
Yeah, but you're also, I'm not sure because if you're designing for the road, you're kind of further from the rail. So you might be having more noise mitigation for the road, for road noise.
Yeah.
But then as you move closer to the rail, you're reducing the noise mitigation you need for road noise.
Yes, still be useful to, yeah, it does make sense. Still be useful to see that graphic though, Charles. And it may be that there's a partial overlap between the two. Maybe there's not, but
Where the state highway is
Yeah.
and rail corridor, they're not.
Get close.
Yeah.
And part.
And parts, yeah.
Yeah. I guess the last part of that question is to you, Katie, to adopt Mr. Ardern's recommendation of 40 dBA, 40 metre setback. Do you have are you saying you don't have sufficient information to adopt that either? Okay, and you would need more information on train.
So evidence,
evidence to show that there's.
Okay.
yes,
Train.
factual evidence.
Okay, that's all from me.
Before we move on, I can clarify that matter about the designation of if that would be,
Would be very helpful,
would.
thank you.
someone here's done some homework behind us and let me know. But they do a designation across the full districts, and that's a rollover designation. There's been no changes sought. There's no conditions on that designation, and the where it applies is just to their corridor or lands that they own. So that differs between 20 metres and I think 250 was the largest, which is at the Masterton station.
20 metre corridor, except where it intersects with the station, so that's the Marston, where it's 250, do you say?
Yes, yeah, 250 is the largest, but effectively it is their land. It doesn't
Kiwi rail land.
beyond that.
Thank you, Solitaire and Charles.
Yeah, just put that formally in the.
Okay, I'm conscious that we still have 4 other chapters. Thank you, everybody. Moving on to NZTA, we're up to paragraph 28 of your report. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor notes that the submission, so this is going to noise rules 12 and 13, and that the NZTA submission referred to noise R12 and noise R13, and that the reference to R12 was an error. And Mr. Talbot and Charles consider that noise 13 and noise standard 3 apply to zones. The noise should apply to all zones within the noise control boundary overlay and not just the residential and rural zones. As outlined by Mr. Ardern, the intention was to never exclude section of noise sensitive accesses in these zones. I recommend that noise S and noise S3 are amended. And Mr. Talbot and Dr. Charles also consider that noise R13 and noise S3 apply to altered buildings as well as new buildings in additions to existing buildings within the noise control boundary overlay. I agree with Mr. Talbot and Dr. Charles that these provisions should prioritize alterations when new habitable spaces are created. I've amended the wording to include habitable room as this is defined in the proposed district plan. And then the record amendments as shown in the tables below.
Just wondering, well, one of the tests that we have to look at is the effective and efficiency test. On an efficiency point of view, so I wonder why you hadn't adopted the habit, or why you could rely on the similar wording that KiwiRail have proposed, even though you're not adopting it, which seems to be a more simplistic way of describing
Those changes.
Yeah.
That's something I could.
Yeah, I mean, the outcome would still be the same.
It's not something I had.
Yeah.
Considered at the time.
We might, I think Mr. Talbot's attending, isn't he? Today, we might put that to him. Okay.
Yes. Yep, my comments as well. So that's NZTA. So New Zealand Transport Agency, by Mr. Talbot and Dr. Charles, are seeking out the acoustic installation rules apply in the following situations. Amendments for the internal noise criteria to apply to all zones as opposed to just residential and rural. And to altered buildings, this is to address a scenario where a building is converted to residential accommodation, not needing to meet the acoustic insulation requirements. So my response in respect to the internal noise criteria applying to all zones, the intention was that never to exclude acoustic detection of noise sensitive activity.
Yeah.
However, we did know that for commercial and industrial zones, there is acoustic insulation provided by other means. And in respect of acoustic insulation applying to altered buildings, noted the intention, the internal noise criteria would apply to a residential conversion, say from a commercial or industrial zone, to new noise sensitive activities. However, I acknowledge that the definition within the wire upper PDP can cause confusion in this respect, as the definition of alteration does not provide enough distinction. So my recommendations was, so I do not object to including all zones for the reverse sensitivity rules, which is R13. And I recommend that an approach is adopted to ensure that any noise sensitive activity is protected from road noise. And this may be addressed by way of amended definitions. And I did put an example in there, but I think some other words have been added, so I won't comment on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Arden, the suggestion that I put to Katie earlier was that that rule could be simplified by simply referring to habitable rooms and noise sensitive activities which will capture new builds and alterations without having to go to the.
Yeah. Okay, that's why I like simplicity.
Yeah, same. And that's the test that we need to be wary of. Yeah.
Anything else? Any questions? Okay.
So noise policy. So most will consider that not everyone should be amended to replace receiving environment with the zone in which the activities occur. The term receiving environment, although not defined in the plan, is a well-known planning term, includes the environment which a proposed change might have effects. As stated in the Section 42 report, I consider that the change would enable high levels of noise in sensitive activities which could compromise the well-being of people and communities. I therefore do not recommend any amendments to noise P1. So moving on to audible bird scaring devices. Ms. Wall considers that noise standard 2 could be amended to provide for the use of audible bird scaring devices half an hour before sunrise and half an hour after sunset, and that clause 2D be deleted. As set out in the Section 42A report, I do not consider that is appropriate to amend the timeframe for when audible bird scaring devices are permitted to operate half an hour before sunrise after sunset. The current permitted operational timeframe of sunrise and sunset seeks to achieve a balance of providing the use of bird scaring devices when bird damage is most likely during daylight hours, while protecting the amenity of people in rural areas. Based on the advice of I do not support deleting standard D on the number of bird scaring devices per land area, one device per 4 hectares of land. this parameter, as this parameter applies in conjunction with standards B and C, in which are based on the number of audible events per device. So standard on the number of permitted number of devices, cumulative effects could arise from multiple devices being permitted in a confined area. I'd like to keep moving on to cross section.
Yeah,
What's the current number? Well, with respect to B, deletion of limits, what's the current number of?
Sorry?
What's the current number that is allowed?
What do we really want?
no more than 6 on its events.
It's
Here at Rick.
Yeah. And what you talk about here, for a significant increase in the cumulative effects, what were those cumulative effects?
So in using the, I guess the additional noise could be used in that additional half an hour before and after sunset.
I'm talking about, not so much that, I'm talking about an increase, a deletion in the limits of the, but you're going to get more bird scaring devices on that 40 off.
Yes.
So you're saying that possibly the cumulative effects is basically noise?
Yes.
So the cumulative effect of 2,000 geese coming in and taking out a crop over a night are not considered relevant here? I'm just being very real. I've seen this happen. You go down one day and you've got an oak crop. You go down the next day, you've got no oak crop. It's just
Not sort of designed for geese.
designed for steering birds. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to highlight maybe an unintended consequence.
So if we keep it to questions, can we keep it, because of the recording, when we've got side conversations going on, it's really hard for people to hear when they're listening back to the recording. So the question that you, yep.
So on cross-section devices, Ms. Ward considers that a new rule should be included for installation in residential activities within 300 metres of a cross-section device, and a new noise standard be included in noise S4 to provide for such noise installation, as stated in the Section 42A report. And the expert evidence from Mr. Ardern in introducing a new rule for sound isolation is not considered appropriate for the level of noise generated by applying frost fans, and therefore does not justify the need for setback rules for new dwellings near existing frost fans based on noise levels. I therefore do not recommend amendments. On seasonal work accommodation, Ms. Worth and Ms. Wright consider that the definition of noise sensitive activity should not include seasonal accommodation, as additional requirements for seasonal work accommodation is inconsistent with the approach to enabling primary production. As outlined by Mr. Ardern, seasonal worker accommodation contains habitable spaces and they should be included in the definition of noise sensitivity. I therefore do not recommend any changes.
Do you want to go to your responses to the, I think,
Yeah. Maybe it's
or the,
probably easier if I just read the whole thing because it refers back. So Horticulture New Zealand has sought the following. So a change to noise to amend the permitted time, the use of audible bird scaring devices to be half an hour before sunrise and half an hour after sunset. Deletion on limits of the number of audible bird scaring devices. Inclusion of a standard for noise insulation for residential activities within 300 metres of a frost protection device, and deletion of seasonal worker accommodation from the recommended definition of noise sensitive activity. So in respect of items A and B, bird scaring, These items were largely transferred from the Wairarapa operative plan, and to my knowledge, they've worked effectively. In specific reference to item B, I am opposed to any amendments to these rules, noting that deletion of limits on the number of bird scaring devices has a potential for a significant increase in the cumulative effects. In respect of item C, which is noise insulation for frost fans, I am opposed to the inclusion of standards for noise insulation in this instance unless further restrictions are placed on the noise generated by frost fans, i.e. limits for new devices applying at the national boundary of any existing dwelling. And in respect of item D, I'm opposed to the removal of the definition of seasonal worker accommodation from the noise rules, as these will contain habitable spaces requiring acoustic protection. So I haven't recommended any changes.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the panel on this? No. Okay, we can move on to Fulton Hogan, paragraph 38.
Kaylee considers that a new rule should be included to control sensitive activities where these are to be located in quarries. The rule has been amended from their previous submission to include farm quarries. As stated in the section 42A report, I consider that activities should seek to internalise their abuse effects before restrictions are imposed on surrounding land. The setback distances sought could also restrict the establishment of dwellings on a significant large area of land. As outlined by Mr. Owen, the use of setback distances is not good practice, as this does not take into consideration the intensity of any activities or factors which affect noise propagation. I therefore do not recommend any amendments.
In line. So Fulton Hogan have requested setback distances are included so that no noise sensitive activities are constructed within quarrying activities. In my response, in my view, the use of setback distances for this type of activity is not good practice, as it does not take into consideration the intensity of any activity or factors which affect noise propagation, e.g. terrain screening. So I do not recommend that this is included within the PDP.
Thank you. Questions?
Question to Katie. What's the status of quarries in the rural zone?
They would require a resource consent, as far as I'm aware.
That would be the entry status for.
I would need to double check.
So farm quarries are a permitted activity.
Yes.
And then any other quarrying activity is restricted discretionary, provided there's no processing on site.
Yes.
That's a regional council.
Can you let Charles finish?
They would also need regional council consent. So the land use component under the district plan, they'll need their restricted discretionary if they have processing on site, or if they don't provide a management plan with action.
Thank you for that. Is there any, to be a restricted discretionary, is there any preconditions relating to setbacks?
No.
And there's no, I know that, I appreciate that Fulton Hogan were asking for presumably setbacks within the noise chapter, but I just, there's no similar sensitive activity rule in the rural zone for the location of sensitive activities in proximity to a quarry.
I'll just double check.
Because the plan does have that approach for some activities, but it may well not be quarries.
They do.
Do you remember which which activities trigger that approach?
Yes, I'll start to my updated regulations. So the setback requirements for residential dwellings. So there's setbacks for all buildings, but standard S3 of the general rural zone has setbacks for residential units. There's 25 metres from any boundary, 40 metres from plantation forestry, where it's under separate ownership, 300 metres from any untreated agricultural effluent, disposal areas, 300 metres from any effluent holding ponds, 500 metres from any intensive primary production, and then 500 metres from any landfill
Okay. That's the rural zone,
or zone, yes,
so nothing on quarries.
nothing on quarries.
Okay, thank you.
There seems to be
Question?
a slight disconnect here though, because from our experience in Featherston, the regional council approves the opening of a quarry and has nothing to do with district councils. Then the operation of that quarry in terms of processing is covered in this plan. So there's that disconnect here. Have we closed that loop somehow? What is the definition of processing?
Yes, I mean, as much as we can, we can't obviously control what the regional council, how they manage quarrying activities, but generally they deal with environmental effects on water, air, lands. We're managing all of the land use activities. We have clearly defined what processing is, so that will go to the discretionary status, and then quarrying activities is a defined definition. So it means all of the activities of extraction and then ancillary. So that is clearly defined, and it would be clearly understood that you need both district and regional. But in practice, there is still going to be that overlap that we can only manage to a point.
You don't happen to have the matters of discretion for RDA quarry in the rural zone in front of you, do you?
I do.
Do they include any aspect of reverse sensitivity? Or effect on amenity of neighbours?
They do. I'm just seeing if there's any specific for reverse sensitivity. I will need to refresh myself on where we got to with the rural, but
Yes.
the panel did request conferencing between myself and the reporting of, or the planner for Fulton Hogan, where we did discuss reverse sensitivity, and did come up with a revised rule that was in agreement with Fulton Hogan. In terms of reverse sensitivity, though, it refers to amenity effects, adverse effects of noise, vibration, access, dust, lighting. And then it also refers to visual amenity and character.
Yes. Okay.
Nothing specifically for reverse sensitivity, but that is covered by those matters.
If you could just formalise that answer and response, you could. Thank you.
Hey,
So paragraph 39, the recommended amendments in response to pre-stipulated expectations are inclusion of conservation activities under limited duration, including agricultural aviation activities and helicopter landing areas, and the natural open space zones included in the border zones, including hospitals in the definition noise sensitive activity, amending noise R13 to apply to all zones within the noise control overlay boundary, and amending noise R13 to include operations to exist habitable rooms. And then in addition, I note the following corrections, whereas in the section 2A report for noise, the definition of noise sensitive activity includes any in the first line of the definition, which is not included in the publicly notified PDP. I therefore recommend that any is removed. So the key matters in contention, whether temporary commercial helicopter activities should be provided for as a permitted activity, whether rail noise controls and a vibration alert layer be included in the plan, whether noise P1 is needed to replace restricted environment with the zone in which the activity is occurring, whether noise standard 2 is amended to provide the use of audible bird scaring devices half an hour before sunrise and half an hour after sunset, whether a new rule is included for noise insulation for residential activities within 300 metres of a frost protection device, and a new noise standard is included in noise S4 to provide for such noise insulation, whether the definition of noise sensitive activity includes seasonal accommodation, and whether a new rule is included to control sensitive activities where these are to be located in proximity to forest.
3 quick ones. In terms of the paragraph, section 5, paragraph 39, but D, just acknowledging that there might be an alternative wording. And 40A, is there any unintended consequence of
No, I think it was
any?
just the extra, it's in the one I think I included in my 42A, any, and then each bullet point is any.
Okay.
Yes.
So just the chapeau.
Yeah,
Yep.
extra any's.
Okay. And 41A. Is that zone based? Was it related to any particular zone?
That was the rule, the helicopter
Zone.
around, the rural.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Covered a lot, and I think that's a lot of additional information that's very useful. It's a shame that Kiwi Rail weren't online to listen to a lot of that. Moving on, our next chapter for us under discussion is activities on the surface of water. Becca Adams is our reporting officer for that one. Welcome.
Hello. Cool. I'll just jump straight into it.
Thank you.
So I start at paragraph 4.
Perfect.
Cool. So the purpose and content of the activities on the surface of water chapter is to manage the effects arising from activities on the surface of water. The Wairarapa has numerous rivers, streams, lakes and wetlands which are valued for a range of reasons and used for various activities, mainly recreational and food gathering. The water, as well as beds of lakes and rivers, are managed by Greater Wellington Regional Council, and activities on, under and over freshwater may require resource consent from the Regional Council. Certain activities, including structures such as culverts and weirs, and activities relating to natural wetlands, are subject to the National Environmental Standards for freshwater. Therefore, there are a limited number of activities on the surface of water that fall within the remit of District Council. Hence the very modest chapter that we've got. A total of 9 original submissions and 2 further submissions were received on the activities on the surface of water topic. The majority of submissions were in full support of the provisions of the chapter, while 1 partial support subject to clarification and 1 submission in full opposition. I have read their respective evidence of Aviation New Zealand and Transpower. I acknowledge the support of Ms. Ng for Transpower to retain ASWP3 as notified, as requested in Transpower's original submission. I have read the evidence of Ms. for the Helicopter Association and note that no reference to their respective submissions on this topic was mentioned. The original submission sought that ASWP1 be retained as notified, which was recommended to be accepted. There has been no further evidence received prior to the publication of this summary statement. Based on the evidence received, there are no matters in contention, nor any revised recommended amendments. For completeness, I have reattached my recommended changes to the activities on the surface of water chapter as per the section 42A report. The only recommended amendment to the chapter was to ASR2 to add the exception clause to enable temporary structures associated with temporary military training activities. There are no recommended amendments in response to pre-circulated expert evidence.
Thank you. Any questions from the panel?
Just got one. Speaker in paragraph 5 on an overview of activities, mainly the range of reasons and used for various activities, recreation, food gathering. There's nothing there about stock water.
But this is activities
so-
on the surface of water.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, well, it's still used for stock water.
I guess that's then captured under Greater Wellington's the use of the water. Yeah. It is a funny chapter where it is really just that it's what you're doing on it.
Surface.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
Technically,
know.
stock drinking from the top of the
Yeah,
water.
I know where you're coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is still an activity. That's what I think. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's more covered under Greater Wellington or even like the water race.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Moving on to your light chapter.
Brilliant. I'll start at paragraph 4 again. So the purpose and content of the light chapter is to provide for and manage artificial lighting while minimising potential adverse effects, particularly for people's ability to sleep and view the night sky, and protect cultural values associated with the night sky. Artificial light is necessary for a range of safety purposes, such as road lighting, navigation aids, and personal safety. However, excessive or poorly controlled artificial light can adversely affect amenity values across the Wairarapa. Proposed district plan introduces provisions based on the recent dark sky plan change from 2022 in the operative district plan, which applied to the Carterton and South Wairarapa districts, which support and recognise the Wairarapa International Dark Sky Reserve. These provisions also are proposed to apply to the Masterton district in the proposed district plan. A total of 7 original submissions and 2 further submissions received on light. The majority of submissions were supportive for the chapter as notified, with 6 requests for amendment and 1 request for an outright deletion. The amendments requested expanding policy and rules to specifically include specific activities, largely for clarification purposes. I have read the respective evidence of Kiwi Rail Holdings Limited, New Zealand Transport Agency, and Horticulture New Zealand. I acknowledge the support of Ms. Grinlinton Hancock on behalf of Kiwi Rail to my recommendation to accept their request to amend Light S1. I also acknowledge the support of Mr. Talbot on behalf of NZTA in my rejection of their request to amend Light S1. NZTA no longer seek the relief sought in their original submission point. I have read the evidence of Ms. Wolf for Horticultural New Zealand. And, there's an error there, sorry. And note, there is no reference to submissions on this topic. The original submission from the submitter sought amendments to Light P3 and Light S1, both of which were recommended to be rejected. Horticulture New Zealand intend to present at the hearing and may wish to confirm the scope and their position on these matters, but for now I have listed their relief sought as an outstanding matter in section 6. To date, there has been no evidence received from Genesis Energy or New Zealand Pork Industry Board. Both submitters sought amendments to the chapter, which were recommended to be rejected as per the section 42A report. I have also listed their relief sought as an outstanding matter in section 6. Based on the evidence received, there are no recommended revised changes to the light chapter. For completeness, I have attached my recommended changes to the chapter as per the section 42A report. The only recommend
Are there any questions so far?
The only recommended amendment in response to submissions on the light topic is to amend light S1, the exception clause and matters of discretion to include reference to the rail network and associated features. There are no other recommended amendments in response to the pre-circulated evidence. Based on matters raised in submissions and pre-circulated expert evidence, the only key matters remain in contention are whether to amend light P3 to exclude the general rural zone from the policy, whether to amend light P4 to exclude renewable energy generation activities, whether to delete light S1 and insert a effects-based standard based on zones that provides for lighting required for people's health and safety, whether to amend light S1 to extend the exception to include mobile machinery associated with primary production, whether to amend the introduction to specifically identify operational safety, security, and need for lighting associated with primary production and mobile machinery.
Got a couple of.
Sorry, Alice.
Yeah, could I, the only area I've got a little bit of question on is mobile machinery and the agricultural thing. And what would it actually change anything if you were to include that? Because there's plenty of machinery on farms that aren't vehicles. So what would be the effect of including it?
That's what I wonder. I actually, when I was preparing the summary statement, I thought that question might come up. And when I first read it, yeah, I kind of just used the assumption that it was just all, I guess, tractors and vehicles. I almost think I don't know enough about farming to what other mobile machinery, or is it, a tractor pulling a harvester?
What would be the effect of adding it?
Very little.
So you wouldn't object to adding it in?
I wouldn't, so long as I know more about the machinery.
Okay, could you have a think?
Yeah, definitely.
Who was the submitter requesting that?
Board. Yeah.
Board.
We'll be able to flesh it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know if there was any machinery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hang on, was it
We're not-
Horticulture New Zealand or New Zealand Pork Industry Board?
No, Horticulture New Zealand.
It was a horticulture.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I thought it was pork.
It could be any machinery working late at night, basically.
Combine harvester.
Harvesters, silage machinery, trucks, tear around.
Yeah, which are often towed by a vehicle.
Yes,
So I would have.
they used to. Nowadays, the machinery is that large.
Okay.
Self-propelled.
And this is
How does that then become a vehicle? Is I guess.
No.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
It's not really roadworthy.
Yeah, so I think I'll happy to gather a bit more information about types of machinery, and then look at it there in my right of reply.
Could be
Thank
a
you.
bulldozer or a digger.
Do they need warrant of fitnesses or certificate of, what do you call them?
No,
Cops,
no, no,
but-
no.
I think if Ms Adams does a bit more research and comes back as part of her right of reply, just to clarify.
Yes, I think the evidence from Hort might assist too. So,
Yeah.
In terms of your paragraph 18 or your summary,
Yes.
the bullet point was that Hort also, Horticulture New Zealand, or was that someone, who was this?
That was sport. Yes.
And renewable energy, was that Genesis?
Yes, that's correct.
And one question, with the three standards, S1, S2 and S3, is there any potential that the S2 and S3 could undermine S1? S2 and S3 set standards that presumably which are minimums for outdoor sports and for road lighting. And there's probably a health and safety component to that, or an operational component. So they are setting minimums that must be provided, whereas S1 is trying to reduce the amount of artificial lighting glare. Could an operator be in a position where they're meeting, say, S2, but at the same time not complying with S1? Given any thought to that?
It's associated that with the activity, like the out S2 would only be applied to like recreational facilities.
Yeah, I mean S2 will set out minimum standards for illumination to be achieved for, say, sports lighting. That standard that to be achieved might be higher than the standard that is in S1, which is trying to reduce the amount of glare. And I mean, I'm sure this was canvassed in the plan change, that's supposed plan change, but I wasn't involved in that. I'm not too sure how that landed. Is that something that you could have a think about in your reply?
Yes.
I haven't really looked at the rules, but I don't think the rules provide the answer. Because you've got to comply with S1, S2 and S3 to be a permitted activity. Now you might comply with S2 and S3, but not S1 or vice versa.
I see what you're saying now, yeah. Now I can have a look at that.
As to what the solution is, I don't know if there is a problem.
Both of,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good point.
Anything else? I don't think we.
Thank you.
Charles, you captured the checklist. Thank you. Next up, we have Chris Gorman on signs. I think, welcome. I think we can go straight to paragraph 7, your summary statement.
Okay, so yes, there were a total of 7 original submissions with 25 individual points and no further submissions on the sign chapter. Of those, 13 submission points gave their support to the various provisions. One submission sought relief that is more of an operational matter than a planning matter, and the 11 remaining submission points have requested amendments in their support or opposition to the provisions. Submissions to the signs chapter came from Kiwi Rail.
I think we possibly could take those as read. Maybe going to paragraph 10.
Right.
Please.
So I have read the respective pre-circulated evidence of Tom Anderson on behalf of Chorus, etc. Ing on behalf of Transpower, and Michelle Winlock, Hancock and Catherine Hipwaite, and on behalf of Kiwi Rail. I respond the evidence as below. I acknowledge the support of the recommendations to the sign chapters from Miss Ing on behalf of Transpower and Miss Grinlinton, Hancock and Miss Hepplewhite on behalf of Kiwi Rail. The primary concern raised in the circulated expert evidence of Tom Anderson was that while I had included infrastructure rollout signs as a recommended inclusion to the temporary sign rule, he felt it did not provide a sufficient length of time for these types of signs. Mr. Anderson provides 4 examples where rollout construction involving signage went for more than 9 weeks. And the examples range from 2.5 months to 6 months. The written evidence from Mr. Anderson outlines the benefit of signage being erected in construction in conjunction with infrastructure construction. I accept that reasoning that he provided. Mr. Anderson directly related to the period of construction, 4-week period after the infrastructure being made operational for the removal of the signs. This proposed change provides better clarity than the original submission as to the timeframe when signs may be installed. I note the reasons given for requesting a longer timeframe than my Section 42 report has recommended. In particular, within paragraph 10 of Mr. Anderson's evidence, he notes the only time communication companies erect signage is for longer term construction work. This implies that the telecommunication companies would be using the permitted temporary sign rule less frequently than election signage, which is general and local body election signage every 3 years, and event signage potentially multiple times per year per venue. While my recommendation sought consistency in the temporary sign rule for different types of signs, I acknowledge that the frequency of an activity, temporary signs, can contribute to the adverse effects as much as the duration of the activity. Therefore, allowing less frequent signs to remain for a longer period of time than more frequent signs might achieve a consistent approach in considering adverse effects. Thus, I would agree with Mr. Anderson's conclusion at the end of the table in paragraph 16 in his evidence that retaining the duration I have recommended in the 42A report would have the disadvantage of more resource consent activities that do not have significant effects. Therefore, I support the relief sought in paragraph 15, Mr. Anderson's evidence, and recommend that subclause F of rule sign R4 be amended to read any temporary sign advertising new infrastructure provided by a network utility operator must only be installed for the duration of the construction of the infrastructure and a period of no more than 4 weeks of the infrastructure being made operational. The recommended amendments in response to the submissions to provide clarity of the chapter policies and rules and to provide better consistency between the various types of based on the matters raised in the submissions and pre-circulated expert evidence, I have accepted the relief requested, and there would be no matters remaining in contention to be considered during this hearing. Oral evidence at the hearing may require continuing dialogue between submitters and council staff.
Yeah. Are there any questions from the panel?
None for me.
I do note that we have received an email saying that Mr. Anderson, on behalf of the telcos, has accepted your summary statement and doesn't feel he needs to attend today's hearings either. Thank you. So that leaves us with our final chapter summary statement, which are temporary activities, and welcome to the table, Matthew Golson, who's the author. I think we can probably go straight to number 7, paragraph 7.
Paragraph 7. Cool.
Which is raised in citizens.
So there was a total of 5 original submissions with 15 submission points. There were no further submissions on this topic. The temporary activities topic. Submissions were generally all supportive of the provisions in the chapter as notified, with some requested amended wordings of the existing. There was a request for a new definition and provision, a new rule. So, responses in relation to pre-circulated expert evidence. There were none for this topic, so I don't have anything. Number 9, main recommended amendments and submissions for the temporary activity topics were an amendment to Rule 3, to amend the rule to only apply to outdoor storage. As notified, it just said storage. Amendment to Rule 6 to better align with the New Zealand Defence Force procedures, and that Rule 6 is a, double check, but that is a specific rule for temporary
Military training
activities, as requested by the Defence Force. So amended that rule as well, and then the insertion of a new rule and associated definition as requested by FENS. So that'd be down at the bottom of the following.
That's Rule 7. Yeah.
That was as requested in their submission, as the wording of that rule. And the only matter remaining in contention potentially is there was one request by Fulton Hogan to extend the temporary outdoor storage of goods from 6 to 12 months. My opinion was that that's probably slightly too long, from 6 to 12. The outdoor storage to be considered temporary. Summarises it.
Thank you. Questions on the panel? Questions regarding storage of goods? Craig, did you?
Yeah,
You happy?
definition of, sorry, that's my place.
Rule 3.
Material.
Definition of what, Craig?
Temporary outdoor storage, I've got it written down in my notes, but I'm just struggling to now find it on the paper.
Might be at the very back. Might be at the very back.
Yes.
What were they talking, what goods were they?
Yeah. What good are actually talking about in the definition of storage? Are we talking about? I'll use an example this morning. They're going getting 200 trees and storing them outside of my place for a period of time. Are we talking about a container or what? What's the definition? All right, sorry, I lost my place.
So you're looking for clarification on what, if I'm paraphrasing you, goods and materials.
What defines goods and materials? It's a very arbitrary statement. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think there's a definition of goods and materials in the plan, but there is a definition of outdoor storage. So I guess as notified, that rule was actually temporary storage, whereas I've recommended it be temporary outdoor storage, given that indoor storage is unlikely to have any, impact on the visual environment. So now that rule does actually align with a definition we've got in the plan for outdoor storage. However, defining goods and materials, I wouldn't have any further at this stage. But I can potentially look, because that is an existing rule in the operative plan, whether myself or I can talk with other councils on how that's been interpreted.
How often is this an issue?
Could note that.
I got my reply.
Not often.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want anything addressed in the right of reply on that?
I would assume that reading Fulton Hogan's submission, they're all on about quarrying and those activities. So I'm assuming they're talking temporary storage of quarried material on the side of the roads and I would imagine that's what they're looking at.
I would assume would be their concern. And I guess the other aspect that I was trying to understand with this, as this rule only covers something if it is temporary. So anything that could be considered permanent storage wouldn't be covered by these provisions technically.
I think that's
That's a good point.
Yeah.
their issue would be saying, because they're sealing of roads, for example, they will pre-position gravel there that they need for the road maintenance well before the activity. And it may well exceed 6 months, particularly if the weather is bad and they can't seal. So that's probably the submission that they're talking about, the quarrying and those materials. Maybe that's something you go back and just clarify that that's the issue. And if that is the issue, how are they covered with this within that regard? Because we know sometimes road maintenance is delayed by 6-8 months because of weather or whatever reason.
And I note that they're not presenting this afternoon.
Not a big deal. I can't imagine Solitaire telling them to go and shovel up their gravel and move it because the road hasn't been sealed. Practically, but I'm sure they don't want to get caught by it.
I think perhaps going back to what the original question is about, and I think it's more like an information question for you as a panel member. What are goods and materials? Perhaps any of our planners might be able to shed light on that for us. Or
A generic term to encompass lots of things that we don't want to name.
It is a very generic term. I'm actually just going through a decision on a quarry because I have a feeling that we might have addressed what becomes a good. So I'm just reading through that now.
Out of interest, what is the definition of temporary outdoor storage?
So outdoor storage is defined.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, definition of outdoor storage.
Yeah.
What is it?
Sorry. Means the use of land for the purposes of storing vehicles, equipment, machinery, natural and processed products and wastes on a permanent or semi-permanent basis and outside a fully enclosed building.
Okay. So, but there's no definition of temporary outdoor storage.
Not temporary outdoor storage.
Maximum 6 months
Yeah.
currently.
And I also note,
Yeah.
I also note on Fulton Hogan's letter that's been tabled, they don't actually even raise this in their response to the Section 42A report.
Were they the only submitter in relation to that?
Yes, in relation to that R3 outdoor storage. Yep.
So they're not in that.
Oh, yeah.
That's
So if the building isn't fully enclosed, it falls outside this definition.
Yeah, we'll look at that. It includes, a semi-enclosed building to me is included in this. It's not, it doesn't include fully enclosed buildings,
which would require building.
even if they're temporary, like a container.
Oh, container would be fully enclosed.
Yes.
Yeah, so it won't trigger the rule.
So what Thornton Hogan's have said is the temporary outdoor storage of materials is not dissimilar to the temporary storage of construction related materials. Thornton Hogan would prefer some alignment between these two rules to minimise the chances of issues of interpretation regarding whether materials are ancillary or to construction or demolition.
But again, they haven't, in their response to the Section 42A reports, haven't brought this up. So there's no other questions. That brings us to the conclusion of reviewing the chapters. 4 minutes early. Well, I just didn't know what you were going to come up with. So with that, I will adjourn the hearings until 1:15. Thank you.